Hello Year 9, hope you're all really well. I'm looking forward to half term. I am just going to do a little video to explain where the punctuation goes in this extract. A lot of you got a lot of it right, but there are some bits that are missing. You can choose, if you want, just to use the answer sheet which is attached to the lesson, which looks a bit like this, which shows you where all the pieces of punctuation go and gives you reasons. But if you're not sure, it might be easier to have a listen to this. So let's make a start. There were 3 reasons I didn't like boarding school. Okay, and then after this introductory statement, there is a list of reasons why the person doesn't like boarding school. So the best piece of punctuation here is going to be a colon, because you're introducing the list of things that the person doesn't like. Now the things within the list are quite long: terrible food full of lumps, grumpy teachers who didn't want to be there, etc. So I would suggest using a semicolon to divide up the things in this list. If you didn't use a semicolon, it's not the end of the world, but you do need to use something, and a semicolon would be best. So the things that I didn't like about boarding school: terrible food full of lumps. Some people put a comma in there, that's fine, it's not essential. But a semicolon here would be best. Grumpy teachers who didn't want to be there. Now here we've got a spelling mistake as well. That's the wrong version of there, so we need to just change that to ERE. And boring lessons, which consisted mostly of copying from the board. Some people put a comma here. It's not essential, but it wouldn't be wrong if you did. Okay. You don't need to have a piece of punctuation here or a semicolon, because it's the 3rd item in a list, so we don't need that punctuation before and. And the spelling of bored there was the wrong one. That's I am feeling very bored. A board or a whiteboard is BOARD. Okay, so next bit. Mr. Trunchbull, the headmaster, had wavy orange hair. Now this bit here, the headmaster, is extra information, so that needs to be separated off by commas. Mr. Trunchbull, the headmaster, had wavy orange hair. You could put a comma here as well, because there are 2 adjectives that are used to describe his hair. He had wavy orange hair and a bushy moustache. Everyone hated him. Now, although everyone hated him seems to be really related to how he looks, it is a separate sentence. Okay, so a comma here would be wrong. That was quite a common splice that I picked up a lot of you have done, and it needs to be here either a full stop, capital letter, everyone hated him. It could be a semicolon. Okay, it could be a dash, but what it can't be is a comma. Okay, that's a comma splice. So everyone hated him. Even the parents were scared of receiving their children's reports from him. So we've got some punctuation errors here. This is one of the spelling rules we have been learning about. I before E except after C, so that needs to be EI. This is the wrong spelling of there, because it's a possessive pronoun, so it should be THEIR. And children's here requires an apostrophe. The apostrophe needs to go between the N and the S, because it is the reports belonging to the children, not belonging to the children's. Okay, so that's one of those tricky ones. Moving on. I remember clearly the time this I was excluded. It was all Trunchbull's fault. Again, this is a common comma splice I've picked up here. It seems to be clearly linked that this person was excluded and it was Trunchbull's fault, but they are 2 separate sentences that make sense on their own. I remember clearly the time that I was excluded. Makes sense on its own. It was all Trunchbull's fault. Makes sense on its own as a main clause. If we want to signal that they are related, then we could use a colon. Okay, and the colon would suggest here that it's Trunchbull's fault that he was excluded. You could use a semicolon, you could use a full stop, or even a dash, which some of you did use, but what you cannot use is a comma. Trunchbull's fault is possessive here, the fault of Trunchbull, so we need to have an apostrophe. A lot of you picked that up. So he remembers it, and it went like this. Punctuation is missing there, but it's like an introduction to what happened, so a colon would be the best piece of punctuation here, because it's introducing what happened. Now, If you put a comma, that would probably be okay, but this is really the start of a new piece of speech, so a colon would be better. So we've started some speech here. Now it happens that this is on a new line anyway, but when you have a new speaker, you're going to need to have a new paragraph each time there's a new speaker. So the layout here needed to change, which some of you did and some of you didn't. So I'm just going to switch for this piece of paper. I actually started a new paragraph here anyway, not essential, but it was really talking about a different topic, not the way that the headmaster looked. But certainly here, when the head teacher starts speaking, we need a new line. Okay, when you use speech marks, within the speech marks there must always be a piece of punctuation. Now he's screeching here, so I would have chosen a exclamation mark, but if it was a comma that would have been okay, but there must be some punctuation before the speech marks close. Watson, he had screeched at me. The speech carries on here, so we need a comma and we need to have open our speech marks again and then start with a capital letter, because this is an exclamation here and this is the beginning of his new sentence. What on earth do you think you are doing? We must have punctuation before the speech marks close. Obviously here question mark is going to be the most relevant. What on earth do you think you are doing? Because someone else is speaking, this sentence here should be put onto a new line. Okay, the speech must start with a capital letter. Nothing much, sir, I replied quietly. When we are tagging on an address at the end of a sentence, remember that we need a comma. This was only a few people seem to pick this up. We need to close the speech marks, but we need some punctuation before we do that. So a comma, closing the speech marks, I replied quietly. The comma here because it's not the end of the sentence yet. Nothing much, sir, I replied. Okay, a new line for when the head teacher speaks again. It's a different speaker. Open the speech marks. We need an apostrophe for I don't. I don't like boys who do nothing. Is the end of that bit of speech, sneered the ugly orange-headed monster. So we're going to need a comma, close speech marks, sneered the ugly, comma, because it's a list of what he looks like, orange-headed monster. And then he starts speaking again, so we have to have punctuation, open the speech marks, because nothing will come of nothing. Now here, if you left this as a lowercase letter, that is fine, because this is actually all one sentence. I don't like boys who do nothing because nothing will come of nothing. That is all being said in one sentence by the speaker, so we can leave that as a lowercase letter. In the last section, and that was it, he sent me home. Again, this was a comma splice that a lot of you still left in. This is a sentence in its own. It makes sense. It could be a main clause, and that was it. It's got a verb and it's got pronouns in it, and he sent me home. So what you could use here is a semicolon, you could use a full stop, two short sentences, you could use a dash, but you cannot use a comma. That's wrong. He sent me home. To start with is a connecting phrase, so a comma would be used there. I enjoyed being away from school. Might have a comma here for the second clause, but after a while I got bored. Some people put that after comma in as well after the connecting phrase there, the temporal phrase about time. And then the last thing is the it's here is missing an apostrophe, so it is not great being on your own all day, it's not great being on your own all day. Okay, and so there's a lot of pieces of punctuation in there. If you didn't get any of that, then go back to the sheet that's attached, and it does have all the reasons for punctuation being used laid out on there and explained, but hopefully that is going to help you improve your punctuation even more as you go forward.